Welcome to What She Said, the heartbeat of Canadian women's voices, with me, your host, Candace Sampson. Here, we dive deep into the raw, unfiltered stories and triumphs of women from coast to coast. This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement where empowerment and education collide and where mansplaining is shown the door. We're here to celebrate, uplift, and echo you. So get cozy, tune in, and let's embark on this journey together, exploring the rich tapestry of women's lives, their battles and victories, right here on What She Said. We live in a relentless 24/7 news cycle, and it can be overwhelming to sift through endless updates and discern which issues truly demand our attention. Our brains often tire, and rightly so, from the constant bombardment of information. That's why today's episode is streamlined to highlight 4 critical social justice issues led by women at the forefront of change. Together, we'll zero in on the high cost of groceries and corporate price gouging, concerns about women's pensions upon retirement, the fight for reproductive rights in Canada, and the alarming rise in elder abuse. This show is curated not only to inform and empower you, but also to provide clarity on what's important, enabling you to decide where to focus your energy and how to act. Alongside these discussions, we'll also dive into some entertainment to give our brains a well-deserved rest. So join us as we explore these significant topics together, led by women who are paving the way for real change. Here's what's coming up. First, I'm excited to be joined by Emily Johnson, the force behind the ongoing Loblaws boycott. Originally scheduled to end in May, the boycott has now been extended indefinitely. Emily will share her motivations for starting the boycott, the conditions that need to be met, and what's next for this movement. And Brodie has brought us some fantastic entertainment picks this week. She shares her thoughts on Richard Gere's new movie Longing, filmed in Kitchener and Hamilton, Ontario, Bad Behavior starring Jennifer Connelly, and the gripping 8-part docuseries Spy Ops on Netflix. We're also diving into a crucial but often overlooked aspect of financial equality, the gender pension gap. This is the 4th installment of What She Said series with Ontario's Pay Equity Office. Commissioner Kadie Philp is here to help us understand why this gap exists and what can be done to close it. Later, I'm honored to welcome Tracey Ramsey from Unifor to discuss their Reproductive Justice Now campaign. This initiative is dedicated to ensuring access to comprehensive reproductive health services and advocating for reproductive rights. Tracey will share more about the campaign's goals, activities, and the critical importance of reproductive justice. Finally, as we approach World Elder Abuse Awareness Day on June 15th, I'm privileged to have Bénédicte Schoepflin, Executive Director of the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, join me. This day is a crucial moment to acknowledge elder abuse as a significant public health and human rights issue. It's a packed show, so let's jump in right now. Kicking things off today, I'm excited to be joined by Emily Johnson, the organizer of the ongoing Loblaws boycott. Initially set to end in May, the boycott has now been extended indefinitely. Emily is here to share what motivated her to start the boycott, the conditions to be met, and what's next. Welcome to What She Said, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here.
So what prompted you to start this boycott initially?
You're going to laugh. Honestly, I had seen a holiday planter on the Ontario subreddit. It was $85 and it was just some sticks and some ribbon. And the original poster had said, Loblaws is out of control, holiday edition. And that was kind of the aha moment. Why don't I just make a fun little sub for people to kind of share memes and grocery prices, that sort of thing. So the community was fairly small to begin with. And when Loblaws announced that they were reducing their discounts on expiring goods from 50% down to 30% in January of this year, we saw tens of thousands of members flock to our sub almost overnight.
And so at that point, was a boycott, forming, or when did you say May is the month we're going to be officially boycotting?
So our official announcement was in early March of 2024, but we had between January and March, we'd started to see a lot of conversations popping up about how we need to do more as a community, do more as consumers, and try and hold these people accountable for kind of what they're doing. So we had hosted a series of polls of our community to kind of get an idea of who they wanted to boycott, how long they wanted to boycott, as well as just anything else kind of we wanted to tackle in this boycott. And so we had decided May of 2024, we wanted to boycott Loblaws and their affiliates for 1 month.
And on the first day of the boycott, Loblaws announced a 15% increase in its dividend payout. Did that surprise you? And do you think it influenced the movement to dig in a little bit more?
I mean, it definitely caused a lot of upset among our community members. And then I ended up having the opportunity to meet with Per Bank the next day, who claimed that dividends are not part of this problem. In 2023, Loblaw drained the company of over $2 billion between share buybacks and dividend increases. So that's a lot of money that's not going to consumers and not going to hungry people, really.
And so let's talk about your meeting then with Per Bank. I'm going to jump ahead a question here. How did that meeting go? And what did you discuss with him?
So overall, I would say the meeting was positive. It was a surprisingly pleasant, calm, respectful discussion. Got to share some of the concerns that the community is facing, and he got to share some of the strategies that Loblaw is trying to implement in their stores.
I suppose my question would be, did you buy it? Did you believe what he was saying? Or did you feel this was a strictly PR move?
I think it was definitely a PR move, to shorten my answer. In terms of, what I felt about it, I didn't push back. I wasn't trying to argue with him about the points that he was saying. It was just really, here are the concerns. What do you have to say for these things? What do you have to say for some of these questions? And, take that information back to the community to kind of dissect together, if you will.
And what are the key demands then that you are requesting Loblaws, I guess, do or change in their stores so that this boycott can end?
So we're hoping for Loblaw to sign on to the Grocer Code of Conduct. We'd like to see no further retailer-led price increases for 2024, no further increases to dividends, a commitment to affordable pricing, so looking at price caps on essential grocery items, looking at clearly identifying items which have undergone shrinkflation, as well as having checkout prices cool to reflect the cooling of inflation as well as food inflation.
So the boycott was set to end in May, and it has now been extended indefinitely. Was there a catalyst for this decision?
Honestly, I think a lot of folks wanted to boycott indefinitely from the get-go. We were met with overwhelming support from our community, as well as folks that haven't even been a part of our community. We saw a Léger report released 2 weeks ago indicating that we have 70% visibility, 58% support, as well as 18% participation in the boycott, which is huge numbers. And we've never spent a cent on advertising or anything like that. So this is solely organic word of mouth spread of our message.
So I was boycotting Loblaws for the last 3 years. So when this came up into, public consciousness and everybody was talking about this, I was thrilled, frankly, because I think that's a great thing. And I do believe in collective action actually changing things. But a lot of people have arguments against boycotts, saying that they don't work. So, and they often argue that boycotts can cause economic harm, particularly to the employees and then other small businesses. How would you respond to those concerns?
The biggest piece for me is Loblaw has always been cutting staff shifts, staff wages, and so on. They were the first to end the pandemic hero pay. They were the first to cut shifts in relation to, various business costs, implementing more self-checkouts and that sort of thing. Now they have a finger to point, really, is how I feel that that's been going. In terms of other small businesses, though, we've heard all sorts of stories of how business has picked up and that there has been a drastic increase in traffic since the boycott began. So, we're we're supporting smaller businesses, we're supporting our local communities and our community businesses, and
Right.
doing a deal. So, for us, we stand in solidarity with the workers and the employees of Loblaw, but they're going to cut shifts whether we're boycotting or not.
And what about people who say, well, why not Sobeys? Why not Metro? How come you're leaving Walmart out of this? How would you respond to those people?
I mean, Loblaw has the largest market share out of all of the big five grocers. They operate in a lot of areas in the country which are food deserts. So Loblaw or their affiliates are the only option available. They have a store within 10 kilometers of 90% of the population. So that reach is massive. And also, a lot of folks are concerned about Galen Weston making himself a face of Loblaw. That might have resonated with an older population where, you're looking for that everyman. But for folks who are struggling to make ends meet, it's almost a slap in the face when you have someone who was born into money, who's, living in a literal castle in Ireland, saying that he's an everyman.
Yeah, that doesn't quite wash. And it's interesting because I remember back in the day when, President's Choice sort of first came out and Dave Nickel was the face of Loblaws. And, he did resonate with people, but it was a different time. We weren't in a cost of living crisis. Everybody was sort of living those champagne dreams, on a beer budget back then. That, remember Robin Leach? Like this was a real thing back then when Dave Nickel was leading President's Choice. And now Galen Weston falls flat because that's, it's that divide between the haves and the haves not is so wide that I think people realize it's completely unattainable for 99% of us.
Completely unattainable. And it feels so inauthentic and just disjointed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so the other thing that I think about a lot, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, is, boycotts are interesting. A lot of people say they don't work, but you can look across the internet for examples. Apartheid was brought down by boycotts. Nestle had to change its practices because of boycotts. SeaWorld has obviously had to change because of boycotts. So they do work, but it is getting that collective action. Have you had to deal with what you feel is pushback from people who say to stop it?
Oh, absolutely. There's been, tons of members and, we kind of say like, are probably trolls or, shills or anything like that. I mean, we've got the food professor constantly tweeting about us saying Reddit's not real, boycotts aren't real, all of that fun stuff. And, my response to that is imagine fighting against someone who's looking for food security.
Yeah.
Right. And wants food security for all Canadians. Like it's kind of a weird hill to die on. But a few of us moderators have had to close our private messages because of some of the really, really nasty stuff that we've received from folks.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy to me. And the food professors.
I won't repeat some of the messages.
Please, yeah. Well, I think we've all been around the internet long enough to know what they could probably be. So you talk about the food professor, and I'm curious. In the Reddit page, I noticed there was a whole page dedicated to people he's blocked on, which I thought was amusing because he doesn't really appreciate feedback himself.
No, it's kind of funny. In some private emails that he had shared with me, he accused me of creating an echo chamber. And I said, that's kind of funny when you hide out on your Twitter echo chamber and block anyone that you disagree with. So, it's interesting seeing those kinds of discussions. And, for me, it just kind of speaks to maybe there's an ego involved here, or, maybe there's some concerns about educated young women and that sort of thing. Because if you start off your tweet with, oh, I really love your work, you somehow don't get lost.
So let's just end this here then. I would like to know, what would you like to see to end this boycott? I mean, all of the demands met, some of the demands. What are you thinking?
I mean, I'm going to say all of the demands. I think that these are all really reasonable asks for, any corporation to really ultimately increase food security for everyone.
So how can listeners then, who are interested and maybe they haven't jumped in on the boycott, where can they get involved and support the efforts?
So the biggest thing, obviously, is avoiding shopping at Loblaws stores or their affiliates. That's going to include other names like Real Canadian Superstore, like No Frills. Shoppers Drug Mart is another big one. TNT. I've broken a lot of hearts letting people know that TNT is no longer on the good list. But, we also recognize that not everyone can participate in the boycott for disability and mobility concerns. We've always held, the solidarity piece of that as well. So, reaching out to your reaching out with letters to, your local member of parliament, reaching out to Loblaw customer support, politely asking them to take our movement seriously. As well as just sharing our message. You might not be able to boycott, but other folks in your circle may. So talk to your friends, your family, your coworkers. People are very careful not to bring up the L word around me because then I start ranting.
Yeah. And like, as you mentioned too, there are a lot of places where Loblaws is the only option. So boycotting is relatively simple in a big city where there are other options. But for some people, the only option is Loblaws. So that's a possibility for them. So they will have to look at the other methods you mentioned, writing to your MP, of course, and sharing the messaging with their friends and family outside of their small town. Emily, thank you so much. I'm really curious to see where this is going to go. You've mobilized an absolutely massive army on Reddit. So congratulations on that. Are you going to get into something else down the road? Who are you going after next?
Oh my goodness. We're going to stay focused on this. We'd really like to keep all of our efforts laser focused, potentially building out into, an advocacy agency fighting for food security.
All right. Fantastic, Emily. I'm going to be following along. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, I'm Steve Yerko.
And I'm Tara Sands. Now available from Maji Media is our new podcast, 4Kids Flashback. 4Kids is the company who brought you the English dub of Pokémon in the late 90s and so many other shows like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shaman King, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Kirby, the infamous One Piece dub, and so many more.
We'll be talking to the people who worked at 4Kids. Actors, directors, writers, editors, producers, engineers, you get the point. And hopefully get the answers to questions both you and I have about the company.
I actually worked there as a voice actor on some of the shows.
And I was a kid watching the shows and remember way more than Tara does.
And thank God for that. Steve is actually a professional storyboard artist, which gives some really unique insights into anime and animation. Subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts. That's the number 4 Kids Flashback.
It's time for Saturday Night at the Movies with Anne Brodie. And Anne, you brought me a gift today. You brought me Richard Gere.
Oh,
I like Richard Gere.
all right. We haven't talked about him before. I'm getting an idea of your tastes. What, with Harrison Ford at the top, or is it Richard Gere at the top?
Oh, Harrison Ford is
All right,
always at the top. Always at the top.
Good stuff. Yes. Well, he came to Kitchener and Hamilton to make a movie called Longing. And it's a weird little movie. It's about a guy named Daniel, which is Gere, and he's a successful New York businessman, very successful, very wealthy. So his ex, from who he hasn't seen in 20 years, contacts him, and they get together in Canada. He comes up, and he is told that she had a baby by him. And that the boy, who would have been 19, died in a tragic accident. So he decides to stay in Canada for quite a while, and he investigates. He wants to know what his son was like and how he could relate to him and somehow connect with him in his heart. So he found out that his son was not allowed to graduate from high school because he'd written spray painted a huge erotic poem to one of the teachers on the school wall. And he was left off the graduation list, and there's no photo of him in the school because of it. So Gere decides to meet with the principal and say, this is no good. That wasn't porn. That was a love declaration. He finds out all sorts of interesting things about his child, but there's a really touching moment when he's sitting at the graveyard and he finds another dad sitting at his graveyard. And this is where it gets weird. They decide that the two children who've passed away would have been a good marriage. So they decide to marry them in a full service.
Oh, that
is weird. That lost
That is
me.
weird.
So it's kind of absurd. It's unbelievable and weird. But if you're a fan of Gere, maybe you could leave before the last 20 minutes.
All right. Excellent. All right. Good to know. You know who else I really like is Jennifer Connelly, and she's in the next film we're talking about.
Yes, Jennifer Connelly is so talented. She can do any role. So she's Lucy in Bad Behavior, and she's she's a strange person. She was a former child star, and she reckons she was traumatized by the experience. Her daughter, who's a very common sense sort of a person, doesn't have much to do with her and moved to Australia where she's a stunt person. Well, so Lucy decides to go to this weirdo retreat where a leader played by Ben Whishaw, who I really like, he smiles all the time, never doesn't smile, which is weird. And he's kind of seductive, and there's all this psychobabble that he gives out, and he asks them to do experiments like babying and mothering each other, and it seems to spark a trigger Lucy, and she kind of goes on a downhill slope. It's just odd, very odd. It's very florid, very, I would call it camp. And for what purpose? It just didn't make the remotest sense to me. And it was kind of unpleasant.
All right. So we're 2 for 2 on the weird movies here. Let's maybe move to reality, which I don't think is going to be much less weirder because PSYOPs.
It's weird, but it's so good. It's so interesting. All right. This is an episode each on Netflix about Manuel Noriega, the plot to kill the Pope, Mossad, Taliban, extracting a double agent from Moscow, and recovery of a Soviet missile. That is the essence of each episode. So, and it's all about the CIA and Britain's MI6. And they have former staffers who reveal how these things work. And there was a little knot of people, maybe 15 or 20 men, former Navy SEALs and diplomats. And they were in the Middle East trying to get things done. They worked on their own, terribly dangerous situations. And one guy describes it as a sort of what they did as a combination of Star Wars and Mad Max. They fought this ancient war that goes back thousands of years in the Middle East, and with all the high-tech equipment. And there's one interesting thing which I thought was fun, a fun detail. Apparently, they had signs and signals to one another when they were there or in other cities. One would walk by the other, and if he's eating a chocolate bar, that's a message of some sort. But really fun. And then, of course, after 20 years in the Middle East, the war still goes on. And they say, 20 years for what? We put our lives on the line for this. For what? So pretty interesting. Spy Ops.
That is on Netflix. All right. Excellent. And just really quickly, 30 seconds, Anne, I know there's royal lovers out there. I'm not one of them, but I know they exist. So tell me about Camilla before Charles.
Yes, on CBC Gem. And it's a documentary about what she was like, that she had a past. Well, she hardly had a past. I think she let the air out of someone's tires. But it tells us absolutely nothing new, and it's a complete puff piece. It's a PR exercise, basically, to make her, to retain her status now as one of Britain's best loved women when she was the world's most hated woman not too long ago. Brief mentions of Diana and everything, but it's trying to sum up a very complex history of royalty and personality in 47 minutes. And it just floats by like a little, bee without doing much, without learning much. So another weirdo.
All right. Well, I you know what? I'm good with passing on that one anyway. So, and I assumed it would be a puff piece. Just the trailer alone led me to believe that that's what it was. Yeah. All right, Anne, thanks so much. You've got these and probably more over on whatshesaidtalk.com this week. And we'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week.
Today, we're tackling an important but often overlooked aspect of financial equality, the gender pension gap. This is the fourth installment of our series on pay equity, and joining me is Commissioner Kadie Philp from Ontario's Pay Equity Office, who will help us understand why this gap exists and what can be done to close it. We're taking a rapid-fire approach to our questions today to get to the heart of the matter quickly. Kadie, it's great to have you back.
I love being here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, let's kick things off by defining the gender pension gap and why should we be concerned about it?
Well, okay, the gender pension gap is similar to the gender wage gap. It's really the disparity in retirement income between men and women, and it's measured across the three pillars of Canada's retirement income system, which are, in case listeners don't know, the Old Age Security and Guaranteed Income Supplement, the Canadian Pension Plan, or the Quebec pension plan if you're in Quebec, and private retirement income. So each pillar impacts a gender pension disparity in a unique way, but ultimately we're looking at what is that gender disparity.
So can you describe then the current state of the gender pension gap and how wide it is today?
So the gender pension gap currently sits at 17%. So that means for every dollar of retirement income that a man receives, a woman will receive 83 cents. What's so fascinating about that is when we started this research, we had this hypothesis that the gender pension gap would be closing over time because women have increased labor market participation. And we do see the gender wage gap closing over time. But in fact, in 1976, when they first started measuring gender pension gaps, it was at 15%. So it's actually widened nominally, but still it's, we should look at it because of that.
So what are the key factors then that contribute to creating this gap in pension earnings between the genders?
It's a really good question, which is why we commissioned this report to dive into it. And I'll give you like the rapid fire answer. So that it comes down to, it's multifaceted first, but comes down to the actual design of the Canadian retirement system. And so in the 1960s, the federal government decided to make public pensions primarily dependent on labor market earnings and to keep public pensions small. So private pensions, which were also dependent on labor market earnings, would have room to grow. And this had very direct gendered impacts, which I'm not sure they understood at the time. But now that we're revealing that it does, we can look at it closely. So, poverty relief, something like the Old Age Security is fairly gender neutral. CPP, though, is tied to timed work and compensation level across a whole lifetime. And this favors men. We've had conversations about women's increased responsibilities in care and unpaid work, which obviously affects their paid work or how much time they can spend in the paid labor market. So that's a big issue that we have to talk about around this. Then, of course, finally, workplace and personal pensions. So private pensions actually contribute the largest share of overall pension income, but at the same time, make the largest contribution, the overall gender pension gap. And so, it's a similar concept. Workplace pensions greatly benefit individuals who spend their entire career with one employer, which generally favors men. And it's based on contribution of hours worked. So we're still not addressing this challenge that women have in terms of hours worked.
You touched on this a little bit. So why is the Pay Equity Office deciding to focus on the gender pension gap now? What makes the issue so critical?
Well, our office we have a statutory mandate to actually look at the gender wage gap and everything around it. And so when we started, last year 2022, we did a really kind of high level look at other things associated with the gender wage gap. And the gender pension came up as something that was interesting. So we did, surface level research, and then we thought we should do more. And I think, part of our mandate is to talk very specifically about the gender wage gap, but more broadly about the other gendered impacts or gender aspects of the workforce that affect women and women's economic health. So this is why we're looking at this, and we've worked with Dr. Elizabeth Shilton from Queen's University to help us understand what is it and why it exists, so we can have better understanding of the issue. So relevant policymakers and private sector, everybody who's a part of this, can look at it and come up with solutions.
That 17% is burned into my brain right now. This is a really significant gap. So what steps can women take on their own to improve their retirement income prospects?
Yeah, and this is a trope, but knowledge is power. I think part of the research that we're putting out is so women can be aware and be informed as much as they can around the issues. But there's a limit to what individual women can do, and this is a systemic policy design issue. Policy choices were made in the 1960s that have had gendered impact intentionally or unintentionally, but now we see that they do. So I think, there's a limit to what women can do, but being educated for sure. I think as a society, we have to shift our attitudes. We've talked about this in other segments about women's work and the value we place on these roles, and women's unpaid work that actually limits participation, and look at this, this contribution, the way that, we measure it, and it comes back in economic prosperity for women, because obviously the more women prosper financially, obviously all of us prosper.
And, obviously the Pay Equity Office is doing their part. Women will have to, carry a heavy load to do their part. Is there anybody else responsible for addressing the gender pension gap?
Well, I think, employers who offer retirement benefits and the financial institutions that they work with, who actually manage those funds, could play a really important role here in actually reflecting on the way that their benefits and their retirement packages are structured, to see if there is a unintentional gendered lens. We know there is, because we can see it in the data that's available. But I think they can play a really crucial role. If you're an employer, if you're listening and you work in HR or whatever, you can think about, how do you bring this back to your office to start to question and look at the structure of your benefits programs. Government bodies who are responsible for overseeing pension plans can do the same thing. These are primarily federally run programs. So I think, getting this on the radar of advocates. We are not an advocacy body, the Pay Equity Office. We are a research and regulatory body. But I think getting this in front of the advocates and getting it in front of policymakers so they can look at, the unintended consequences of the design decisions they made in the 1960s.
I think as you're speaking, I really think this is something that most people are not intentionally ignoring. They may just not be aware of it. It's something I had never really thought of before, but of course it makes sense, right? When you start to actually track how this will eventually end up, it is going to end up with a big impact in retirement. So what specific measures should the government implement to aid in closing the gender pension gap?
Well, I think it's important, from a government perspective, to recognize that there's multiple government bodies play roles in this. It's human resources and skills development on the federal level, and economic and social development in Canada, women and gender in the economy, wage. Like there's multiple players, and I think we've got to show the data to get their attention so they can think about the policy constructs. Because, there's responsibilities that cover a wide policy range. And I think that this is something, ideally we create this research so it gets into their hands and they think about the policy constructs that exist. And I think that's the most important things government should do, and they're there to do, is look at the policy environment and the impacts of policy. And I think it's time to have the conversation at the federal level, at least around the way that the system was designed and what they can do.
So if people want to know more then about your efforts and about the data and the information that's out there, where can they go, Kadie?
We have this report launched on our website. So if you go to payequity.gov.on.ca, you should see it in the banner. It'll be front and center because we really want to get this information out there. Also on our website, if you just scroll through, you will see a gender pension link directly. So our website is a great source of information. And I would encourage people to read this report. It's fascinating. It's written in plain, accessible language. And it's meant to really raise the profile of this issue and provide data that's been missing around the conversation.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Kadie, so much for joining me today. I think this one was a really crucial discussion and that people are not talking about enough. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Today, I'm honored to be joined by Tracey Ramsey from Unifor to discuss their Reproductive Justice Now campaign. This initiative focuses on ensuring access to comprehensive reproductive health services and advocating for reproductive rights. Tracey is here to share more about the campaign's goals, activities, and the importance of reproductive justice. Welcome to the show, Tracey.
Thank you, Candice.
I am so excited that you're here. So can you start by telling us about the Reproductive Justice Now campaign and what motivated Unifor to launch this initiative?
Absolutely. So when Roe v. Wade was overturned 2 years ago on June 24th, the women in the union, including myself, really had this kind of visceral reaction of fear, which unfortunately we've seen kind of play out in the states as they're rolling back rights state by state. So immediately the women started contacting me and saying, what can we do? What can we do here? We know that there have been anti-choice, pieces of legislation introduced. We're concerned about access. Lots of concerns were coming in. So immediately we thought, okay, what can we do within our own democratic structures? We have councils that are regional across the country. So we spent the next year going to each of those regional councils and having recommendations introduced to launch this campaign. So because of the size of our union and that we are a national union, it took a full year. So we launched that campaign officially on June 22nd last year when we were out at our Atlantic Regional Council, which is where we began kind of the recommendations. So it's been live for just about a year now, and it really is comprehensive. And it was surprising to us, actually, a lot of the things that we found when we started to research this more deeply.
And what are the primary goals of the Reproductive Justice Now campaign?
Well, overall, I think the goal is to raise awareness. We want people to be educated about what it is that we're asking for and why we're asking, because many people just say, well, this isn't happening in Canada. Why do we care about this? Right. And so we really had to do an education piece in there about why it matters, about what has happened here in Canada. And obviously, it's a solidarity piece with the US, with our sisters there, that we want to stand in solidarity with them and provide them with some type of support and know that they're not alone in what they're facing, that we're watching. And so for us, we started to dig in and look at, there were federal asks, clearly, and then there were provincial asks and territorial. So we worked with the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada to kind of pull out what those things were in the actual regions, because they have kind of provincial bodies that exist that work with them in the coalition overall. So we pulled all that information together and then put it into what I think are really easy to use petitions, where you put in your postal code and it will lead you to either your member of parliament federally or your MLA, MNA, or MPP provincially. And so those provincial asks are really tailored, but you can imagine they focus around access. They focus around access in rural communities. They focus around the ability of folks who don't have an abortion clinic in their area to be able to access one affordably, because that's not a privilege that everyone has. They also focus in on pharmacies. What we found when we started to scratch at the surface was how interesting it was to us that pharmacists have the ability to refuse medication. So if you show up with a prescription...
Wait a minute. Sorry, in Canada?
In Canada. Yeah, it's shocking. It shocked all of us.
You're shocked. I thought I knew a lot on this subject, and this is actually shocking me. I had no idea this was a thing. So sorry, please continue.
Yeah, so mifegamizole, which is like the 2-step abortion medication, if you show up at your local pharmacy and your pharmacist says, hey, I don't want to prescribe that, that's against my beliefs, they have the right of conscientious objection. So they can refuse to actually dispense it to you. But the other thing is that pharmacy can flat out refuse to stock it. So again, imagine you're talking about like some rural communities. I live in rural southwestern Ontario. And I mean, it's hard enough to go to the local pharmacy because typically it's someone right behind the counter. I always say it's your dad's buddy or someone behind the counter.
Of course, yeah.
But they actually have the ability to do that. So we started kind of this grassroots thing where we encourage folks to go out, not just women, but men and anyone with a uterus to go out, go to their local pharmacy, ask, number one, do they stock it? And number two, do they always have a pharmacist on duty who would dispense it? Because can you imagine that you actually get the prescription, you walk in, you think, okay, this isn't an easy walk in, by the way. You're walking in,
Right.
I'm sure with all kinds of anxiety and stress, you walk up to the counter and then you're refused. So this is something we really need, I think, to tackle, because again, this is about the equality. I mean, you don't walk in and get denied your diabetes medication or your cholesterol medication because they disagree with you intervening, in your own health.
Right.
Which, by the way, is only between you and your doctor. So that was probably the most surprising thing to us.
That is actually shocking to me. I'm gobsmacked right now. I'm busy picking up my jaw from the ground and will continue. But reproductive justice encompasses more than just access to abortion. So can you explain what comprehensive reproductive justice means and why it is so important?
Well, it's about choice, right? It's about having choices. And so choices are things like having childcare, having affordable housing, being paid fairly in your job. Like, these are things really that drive whether or not you make that choice. It's part of your decision overall. So those are included. But the enforcement of the Canada Health Act is really critical, right? Like, where are the penalties for these provinces who aren't holding up, access equally, like we said, but also funding? So where's the funding? Where's the funding for abortion clinics equally across our country? And we talk about telemedicine. We really think that this should be a way to kind of bypass that barrier that could exist at the pharmacy, that you can go and you can do this by telemedicine. That's also about your privacy. That's also about, having that ability for confidentiality. So we really, focused in on kind of all of these, and overall as well, federally, making sure that federal politicians are not supporting anti-choice legislation like we saw introduced last spring from Kathy Wagenthal, who is a repeat person in introducing this. And we know that there are anti-choice conservative MPs. They've been, named by the Abortion Rights Coalition for many years for their efforts on this. But I think what really was eye-opening last spring on Kathy Wagenthal's bill, the latest kind of iteration of how they think they can apply personhood to a fetus, which we all know is about abortion, and trying to criminalize it, is the fact that every single conservative politician voted in favor of it. And so, we have lots of folks who say, well, you know what? I actually met Pierre Poilievre and he told me that he won't touch it. I always say that doesn't matter to me. What matters is how they vote, right? You can say whatever you want, but when you put your vote down on something, that speaks volumes. And that actually tells what you would do if you had the ability to push a law through. So, that was very telling. The Abortion Rights Coalition came out and named every single conservative politician anti-choice on the basis of that vote.
Yeah, I believe it's something like over 80% of them are anti-choice. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what role does education play in this campaign then? And what efforts are being made to inform and empower communities? You mentioned there was petitions that people could sign, but what else are you offering people in terms of education?
Well, we're talking about it in all of our spaces, obviously, and trying to inform people, because like you, a lot of people have responses to things they just weren't aware of. They just didn't know, right? Or they question. And so it is about, in our council spaces, providing that information. Our women's spaces, we have 2 women's education weeks that we offer every single year. So that's a component in there. We have a women's conference upcoming. We'll absolutely be talking about it. So for us, it's about not just, emailing folks or tweeting or doing things on social media, but also sharing that information in the spaces where we're kind of in front of our members. But also within, our own communities. And we're also watching what's happening in terms of legislation. Like recently, Minister Nahanni Fontaine in Manitoba introduced the buffer zone legislation, which we want to see as a buffer zone around abortion clinics, and people be able to access that without being harassed. And, there was someone who did this fabulous thing. I don't know if it was on TikTok or Instagram, but it was about vasectomies. Like, when a man goes for a vasectomy, they're kind of this group of people that come and protest him going for this vasectomy and try to block him from going and, show up at his doctor and do all these other things. So I lots of people trying to put it into perspective that this is about choice. And then obviously we're thrilled this week about the inclusion of free birth control in the pharmacare legislation that passed through the House of Commons. So that was a key component of our campaign as well, and really pleased to see that happening.
Tracey, I'm so glad I came across you on TikTok. This interview has been highly informative, particularly to me, but I'm sure other people listening. But also, I love everything you're doing. So, what ways can individuals and other organizations get involved and support this Reproductive Justice Now campaign?
So if you go to our website, unifor.org/reproductive justice now, you'll find our campaign there. Even if you just Google those words, you will find it. It will come up. So please support it. Anyone can sign it. This isn't just a Unifor campaign. Like, this is really a community campaign. Anyone can sign this. You can tweak up the emails that you're sending to your provincial representative or to your federal MP, put in what you would like in there. I think for us, it really is just about trying to get the word out. So using social media to be able to do that. But if you can go to that website, help support it in any way, post on social media that you've done so, ask others to do it, and just simply talk about it. It's really this thing where people just have talked in whispers about their reproductive health and what's happened to them. And, women largely know this because when we start to have children, we talk about it or, make decisions about whether or not, but start expanding that circle. Let's talk to everyone about reproductive justice and what that looks like in our country.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for women in particular to know that this is not a done deal. Abortion is not yours just, to access at any time. It could be rolled back. We've seen pushes, as you've mentioned, towards this. And after seeing what's happened in the States, I never want to hear somebody say it won't happen here.
That's right.
Because it absolutely could. So Tracey, thank you so much for joining me. We're absolutely going to have you back on the show to keep up with this campaign and hear what's happening. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much.
June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So I'm honored to have Bénédicte Schoepflin, Executive Director of the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, otherwise known as CNPEA, join me to discuss. This day marks a significant moment to recognize elder abuse as a critical public health and human rights issue. Bénédicte, thank you so much for joining me today to shed light on this vital topic.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us about the significance of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day and why it was established?
Absolutely. Fun fact, it was established by a Canadian. So it was Dr. Elizabeth Podniaks, who was one, she unfortunately passed very recently, and we're feeling her loss every day because she was one of the leaders of the pack when it comes to bringing elder abuse on the map in Canada, to bring it into research and to call for action. And so she introduced the concept of a World Elder Abuse Awareness Day in 2006. And then in 2011, it became an official United Nations Day, in no small part due to the amount of effort and noise that Elizabeth made about it. And so since that day, it is now official. Every year on June 15th around the world, people get together, organize events, and increase their awareness efforts to get more people to understand, recognize, and react to elder abuse prevention, or elder abuse, I should say.
Well, there is a reason that I focus on Canadian women on this show, and it's because they're amazing. And you just proved it with that answer. So thank you so much for sharing that. Every year, there's obviously a theme or a main focus area. What does this year's theme cover?
So this year, we have gotten together with our partners. Every year, the CNPA organizes a campaign and a national event that is online for June 15th. And it involves partners that are both national and provincial or territorial in scope. So every year, we try to pick a theme that resonates with what we've heard, with the concerns that people are bringing to us, and something that could be a rallying cry for everyone. You know, whether you are new to the concept of elder abuse or you've been involved in it for 20 years, something that can really foster unity and get people moving. So this year, the theme that we've picked is Age with Attitude. Because when you think about elder abuse, it's really hard to separate it from ageism and all those cliches that we have in our minds and those attitudes that we have about what aging should be or what being old looks like, and can actually harm and influence many things in our lives. So we decided that really when you think about changing the world and enhancing things, life, quality of life, safety for older people, it starts with usually having an attitude, being louder, being pushy, being bold, all those things that very often people do not associate with being older. So we decided that these two concepts together were actually great because you get, whether we realize it or not, you get bolder and you get brasher when you get older. And it's a good way to put it to good use.
Absolutely. So can you share some of the initiatives or programs that your organization has developed to support senior safety and well-being?
Absolutely. Do you mean just around June 15th or around year round?
I know you're doing amazing work. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, our organization is focused really on, the main components when it comes to public awareness, public education, and then policy and practice change. So that means that we work with stakeholders, with the government, with other partners across sectors to try to always bring the conversation back to how does this affect older people? Have they been consulted? You can't really think of anything when you talk about, you think about policy or you think about any form of practice, whether it's social services, whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare. You cannot develop something that is truly meaningful and inclusive if it doesn't also include older people, because they have very specific sets of realities, very specific needs, and those cannot be skipped over or assumed to kind of fit into a bigger box with everybody else, right? That's the very core principle. So when it comes to policy change, that's the work that we do, is always making sure that there is that lens on older people, and that there is also, that gender lens, because the reality of older women might be different as well. And then when it comes to public awareness and public education, we do a large amount of events, mostly online, that are free, that are open to all, that are basically teaching people the key tenets of what they need to know about elder abuse. And so sometimes we're going to be looking at something specific like frauds and scams and online and, new developments around crypto scams. And sometimes we're going to look at a bigger picture of risk assessment for professionals, or what are the signs that you should look for. You think something is off, but you're not 100% sure. What are the red flags? And once you have spotted red flags, what can you do? How do you do it safely? Who do you refer the person you care about, or who do you take yourself to? All these things, all these big questions, we try to kind of break them down and tackle them either through online events and webinars with a variety of experts. And that, when I say experts, I mean it in the widest sense of the term. It ranges from somebody in, academia to somebody who's in the trenches, in the social services, and who sees the realities every day, to a person with a lived experience. So we try to really kind of bring all the voices to the table, and then also, develop resources that are easily digested and easily shared. And we have also this bigger vision, this bigger picture, right? 2 years ago, we released a strategy, a national strategy on elder abuse, where we sort of outlined 3 main goals and how to get there. And so that work is ongoing, and we keep talking about it, and we keep developing additional resources to help people in their process, because elder abuse prevention is an everybody problem. Of course, there's the big problem, there's the big kind of systemic picture, but then there's also the community level thing and the individual level thing, where we can all play a role. So now that we've established that, in the strategy, our work is ongoing to kind of help people in whatever position in life they are, on their own, in a community, in a local government, anywhere, to kind of follow through on this. So recently, just last week, we published a new guide called Seniors Leading Change: How to Build an Elder Abuse Network. And that is exactly what the title says. We were asked many times by people saying, there isn't much in my region. I want to do something about prevention. I want to create a safe space where people can meet and become active and advocate and do prevention work. How do I do that? So that's what we did. After so many requests, we built a small guide that helps take people from the reflection phase to the implementation phase and the growth phase of building a local network in order to kind of create this bigger infrastructure of prevention across the country. So that was a much longer answer than I meant to do, but essentially awareness, education, policy, and involving everyone at every level along the way. That's what we do. And WEAD is a big part of that as well.
So engaging the public and mobilizing community action then obviously are really significant aspects of what you do and of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So how can individuals and communities get involved or contribute to these efforts, not just on June 15th, but throughout the rest of the year?
Well, people can each play a role in their own capacity. I would say get educated about elder abuse prevention, learn how to recognize the signs, learn how to talk to people, and share resources, initiate a conversation about ageism, stand up for something when you hear a comment that does not pass muster, that is ageist, call it out, and don't get in a fight ideally, maybe call it in more than call it out, but you can have a say and slowly start changing mentalities around you. That'd be step one.
Wonderful. And you obviously share a lot of information. So could you share where people can find out more and any social channels they can follow?
Our website is cnpea.ca. It's a hub of resources about elder abuse nationally. It includes a find help section that's broken down by province and territory. You can find us on X, Facebook, and LinkedIn at CNPEA as well. And for more information about WEAD, which is taking place next week, weaad.ca, weaad.ca, where you will find all the information you need and some promo materials and social media images that you can share.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bénédicte.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
If today's podcast resonated with you, spread the word and share the inspiration. Don't forget to hit subscribe on What She Said across your favorite podcast platforms. Crave more? Join my vibrant community by signing up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com, and let's get social on Facebook, Instagram, and X at What She Said Talk. Dive into my world a little deeper on TikTok and Threads at Candace Said. And for those who love the airwaves, catch me weekly on 105.9 The Region, Blast the Radio, and 107.7 Pulse FM. Until next time, keep making waves and remember, your voice matters.
I'm Andrea Askowitz.
And I'm Allison Langer. And we are the hosts of Writing Class Radio, a podcast, but we are so much more. We have writing classes. So if you are looking for live online classes where you can join a community, write to a prompt, get feedback, and get better, check out all our classes at writingclassradio.com.
And listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at writingclassradio.com.
What happens when we play outside? We become healthier, both mentally and physically. We become more creative and more focused. We connect with nature, each other, and ourselves. Let's Take This Outside, a new podcast hosted by me, Marianne Iveson, an aspiring outdoor athlete and nature lover. I speak to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about their connection to nature, how it affects their performance, and everyday life. Let's Take This Outside, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and at letstakethisoutside.ca.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.